All right, great. Well, thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much, Dallas, for the invitation to come join your team today. And we get to talk today about a subject that we love to talk about, which is helping out veterans in the whole job transition phase of their lives, whether they're fresh getting out of the military or whether they've been out for a while making another transition. And we also like to help companies understand how to go about doing this in ways that they can attract, retain veterans better. So that said, I'm Steve Casey with Orion Talent. I've been with Orion 25 years. One of the VPs of the company, and former Army infantry officer. Served the 101st Airborne in the Gulf War many years ago. And it's my pleasure to get to work today with a person I've known for about 14 years in Austin, Tony Etnyre, and also Glenn Banton with OSD. You guys?
Hi again, I'm Tony Etnyre, CEO of FTC Solar, which is a local solar company here in Austin, Texas. Been working with the Orion team for about 14 years now with multiple companies, hiring veterans across the semiconductor industry and the solar industry. And really appreciate the opportunity to work with you this morning.
And I'm Glenn Banton. I'm the CEO of OSD. We're a national veteran nonprofit, but also I work with Google's VetNet program, Bunker Labs. I'm on the SBA's VetBiz committee in Washington. So whether it's hiring and the pathway to get there, or the entrepreneur side, that's one of those places that's near and dear to my heart.
Super. Well, let's go ahead and get into some of this and have some fun back and forth on veteran transition, lessons learned, how we can help people understand how to improve their odds in interviews and how to get ready for that whole life of transition. I'll put some slides up here. For the last 25 years I've been in this whole environment of helping veterans make the transition to corporate America. We've learned a lot of lessons as an organization, and we've taken the collective experience of probably 140 employees in our company and tried to put that together to help people on a daily basis learn from each other and how to make a better transition out there. And a few topics we'll cover today will be basic lessons learned, what we've all seen in helping veterans out in this whole space of job change, career change, life change, and things that some tips and pointers for success in this process. And a couple things on our backgrounds real fast. The company I'm a part of, Orion Talent, has been in this space overall for almost 30 years now, and we've helped transition about 47,000 veterans into corporate America, worked about 8,000 companies. And on top of that, we've helped out hundreds of thousands of veterans just learn how to write resumes, interview, and all the lessons learned they can apply to their own job searches as well. And that's pretty much what Orion is today. And we acquired another company a few years back that puts us out in the whole skilled talent industry, working with the companies hiring all types of backgrounds across America. Tony?
Just a brief overview of FTC Solar. So we're a solar energy company. We provide three products to the market. One is a solar tracker, so it's a steel structure that solar panels sit on and orient towards the sun. We provide software services for folks who are designing power plants, and we also provide engineering services for folks who are building large-scale utility power plants. We founded the company in 2017 with about just over 25 employees. We're going to grow this year to about 115 employees. We're working with the Orion team on hiring about 25 veterans across this year, across all pieces of our business, anywhere from supply chain to product marketing to the product management into our engineering and finance organizations. We've got openings that we've been sourcing throughout the whole business.
Glenn?
I'm going to let you keep going with this one.
Sounds good. All right. So as we jump into thinking about veteran transition, there are still not nearly as many as there used to be, but there still are some stereotypes that exist out there with some companies who aren't familiar with veteran hiring yet. Now, I think it's a lot rarer these days to encounter an organization that is not that familiar with veteran talent hiring, but you still encounter it occasionally. And it's funny whenever I hear these stereotypes, being in the business that I've been in for all these years now, because they're just flat out wrong, but some people can still think this. But if you look at one of the slides we're showing, unfortunately, today, from surveys that have been done out there, 2/3 of veterans still think that their view, or they don't think that they're viewed as a strategic asset by the communities or employers, which, in our minds, seeing the success we've seen, isn't true. We want to help dispel some of the myths and rumors out there and stereotypes that either veterans have in their own minds or somebody in a company doesn't understand veteran hiring that they might have. So we want to allay those concerns because the reality is completely different. Reality is what veterans really are people that have learned how to lead people, manage assets, improve processes, improve quality at a very young age, from 18 to 23, whether they enlisted in the military or whether they went in the military as an officer fresh out of college, ROTC, an academy, something like that. So Tony and Glenn, you want to comment on the reality and what you've seen today in your company and other organizations?
Sure, I'll start if that's okay. I think your point about leadership and problem solving are what really resonate with me. I think in business, that's really what makes people successful. That's what we look for in employees, and that's how people advance, is people who can lead teams and people who can solve problems. And there's no environment, I think, that creates the opportunity for people at, as you said, a extremely young age to get the experience to handle those kind of things, to get the ability to work on teams and lead teams, to grow your leadership from small organizations to larger organizations in the military, and then to figure out that it's up to you to solve problems, and there's no one else who's going to help. And those are the attributes that make people successful in our company. That's what the attributes that make people successful around corporate America are: the ability to be a great team member, be able to be a great team leader, and then to figure out how to solve problems collectively.
That's great. Glenn?
Absolutely. No, I'd agree with everything you just said. I mean, we continue to see, in all the different situations that I find myself in, veterans have the ability, I love the phrase, improvise, adapt, and overcome. That's something that is seen all the time. And I think really where some of that wall, ends up being placed between, the employer and the employee, the veteran, is the inability to have that discussion in some cases. And it goes both ways, right? The employer needs to be able to reach an arm out and say, hey, let me show you the way, and the veteran needs to take the hand and keep going. But all things considered, what I've found is, being able to work with veterans, set out some goals, set out some, the right and left boundaries, and give them the resources, and let's get busy, let's go. And that's something that, all things considered, I'd take, 100 times out of 100 over anything else, because it's a lot more predictable, because we're going to keep moving forward. So I think it's those intangibles even as well that tend to manifest themselves a bit more in the veteran community, and that's something veterans need to be proud of, and employers need to continue to understand, value, and really emphasize.
Absolutely. It's funny. A lot of people don't understand, if they haven't done a lot of veteran interviewing, they might interview like a young officer, an infantry officer like Tony, yourself, for example, who, when you're 23, you had an infantry platoon, right? And you were could have been in the U.S. or some foreign country somewhere. I know lately in Afghanistan and Iraq for all these, years now, you'll get a young officer that goes over there, and here you are, you're 22, turning 23, here's 40 people you're in charge of from day one. Make this work, young lieutenant, second lieutenant, and by the way, go build school projects in this foreign country. Like, what? I'm an infantry officer. What's that all about? Or go build a forward operating base up by a border of some foreign country. Work with the townspeople. Figure it all out. That's a common experience for the Navy. Go figure out how to run this engine room for an aircraft carrier with all these people that are way senior to you, but you have to earn their respect. You're not given their respect just because you have a rank. And young technicians or young soldiers getting in at 18, 19 years old, all the schooling they go through, and they go out into the real world, having to do things on the fly frequently. Not all the standard operating procedures always exist for everything. Things change. And Ed, have you ever heard about doing more with less? Did you do that in the military? Want to expound on that some?
For sure, and I think you made a great point about being a young officer and taking over a platoon and not having the experience to really understand how to do that role successfully. And I think about how that translates to corporate America and how that translates to success in corporate America, in that young infantry lieutenants who are successful because they're smart enough to know that they're not the smartest one in their organization. And they have to rely on their first sergeant and their platoon sergeants and their squad leaders and team leaders, because they've got the experience. And a good lieutenant is one that understands they're to lead, but they're certainly to rely on the experience and expertise and guidance of those non-commissioned officers. And when you translate that to corporate America, it's the same. As the CEO of FTC Solar, I certainly hope I am not the best at any one of the responsibilities in our organization. Because if I am, our organization will fail. And so just like as a lieutenant, I had to learn to trust and rely on non-commissioned officers to be successful. I have to rely on my best technology people and my best product management people and my best operations people to lead our organization. And it's the very same thing that you learned, I learned 30 years ago.
Right, that's great. It's interesting, kind of on a higher scale here. I know on the slide we have an example of corporations with military leadership, but interesting statistic for somebody who doesn't know this is that overall, as a whole, corporations led by former military members, their growth rate has outperformed the growth rate of the S&P 500. Pretty amazing, huh? So there's a lot that you learn in the military, whether you enlisted, fresh out of high school, or getting out of college, that definitely relates to corporate America or to other types of jobs, and especially in the entrepreneurial world out there, which is one of the topics of Veterans Lounge today as well. So we'll jump on to the next slide here, cover a couple points. So this is really for companies and veterans both to understand a couple points here. On the company side, for people that aren't familiar with this, when you're looking and thinking about engaging the veteran workforce out there, military veterans, as candidates for your jobs, first off, it's a very diverse pool. It's actually also the most replenishable talent pool for leadership experienced people and technically experienced people. It's a huge resource for companies hiring technicians, kind of like you all used to do at Freescale in Austin. So a lot of great people coming out, and it's a huge transition point every single year. 186,000 people leaving the military annually to join the working world out there in some other capacity. So it's a great resource to tap. And other points about this for people leaving the military yourselves are, what's this mean to you? What jobs can you go into? There are so many. We wouldn't have time today to go into all of that because there's lots of entrepreneurial opportunities you can pursue as well, of course, given what you've done already in your lives. But one of the points are things you might not think about. Could be sales. Could be anything up there. We say 82% of the departing military service members are enlisted, and they go into everything from supervision, maintenance, technical roles, operations, management, leadership, even sales also, technical sales, you name it, field service. Hands down, most of the company feedback I've gotten in 25 years for field service organizations or their best field service reps are military folks, former military service members, because they can handle the customers easily, they can handle the stress, they have the responsibility to do things out on their own all the time, like you mentioned, Tony. In the officer ranks, people don't realize what they've done all the time, but engineering, sales, operations, leadership, management, supply chain, planning, you name it. It's just about, again, leading people, managing assets. Any comments on those points?
Yeah, I just like to add in there too. I mean, I come at this, I'm a civilian, and I've just been working with veterans for years, and the part that I like there, I should say the characteristic, is showing up to get a job done, and in the simplicity of it. Pay me X to do Y or better, and keep giving me feedback. And if for any reason the relationship is such where whether you don't like my face or I'm failing at it, let's have a conversation, figure out where we go from there. And that, I think, is a characteristic very much stretches over in the military space, but I tell a lot of, especially former enlisted younger guys and gals, there's a lot of civilians that actually have the same mentality, but we're in the minority in our community, you're in the majority in yours, and there's a lot of come together that can happen there. And that's something that I think, especially with the different challenges within company culture these days, and cold brew coffee and bring your dog to work day and summer Fridays and all those, they're fun, they're important, they're great, and that motivates some. But I think there's that real basic simplicity of, regardless of the role, showing up, getting a job done, being a part of something great, and coming back and doing it the next day.
You bet. Oh, thanks, Glenn. So true. There are surveys done out there galore that if you're a company member looking to hire veterans, you can go to. We did a survey of hundreds of companies nationwide the last couple of years to get their feedback. And we only bring this up to point out what companies see in their results in having hired military veterans. And in general, the retention rates are higher overall. And for companies actually that set up internally a real program to do this the right way, to set up veteran ERGs and so on, something that Glenn, I know you do a lot of with organizations. When they take a handful of steps, 5 main steps, they can have an even higher success rate with retention. And it's over 90% of the 2-year mark in higher military veterans is being retained in the company. So some interesting things out there. Companies can learn to do better. But just we wanted to show veterans this slide because it means that you're a highly valued resource out there. Even though that point earlier said 2/3 of veterans don't think they are valued as highly, the right companies really do when they get it. And it shows in their results of hiring. Any comments on that or things you've seen out there, Tony or Glenn?
I just throw out there because some people ask, what's an ERG? Employee resource group. So inside of large corporations, and now thankfully a lot of smaller ones, you have these resource groups for different, topical needs. Oftentimes they're tied into diversity and inclusion, but what they're there for is retention. So it's to take, I'll use Oracle's one we've been working with for quite some time. They have the Oracle culture, but they have a subculture that exists in these ERGs, and the goal is to make sure if you're unhappy with your job or you want to have feedback, you have those people that are like you, that subset to give that information to. And what they'd found over the years, and we've seen this in a lot of corporations, is when a veteran quits a job, they go through the exit interviews, and a lot of times the feedback that they're giving is not that they really disliked anything. It was more about, well, I thought I could do better. I just wasn't really getting along with this manager. And the system is not in place historically based upon, again, military experience, respecting, order of operations and chain of command to say anything. So what do? They just quit. And so there's been a lot more emphasis on these ERGs to ensure that you're talking to peers, but the peers know, and it's part of the culture, here's how you escalate that. So when, Chad comes over and says, man, I just, I feel like I do a lot more. I can't get through to my manager. People know where to go with that. And you have that higher retention. You have the better employee satisfaction. And you're not losing that talent that a lot of times a lot of money was invested in. So I think that's something really important that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's 2 important things that hiring companies can do to help veterans be successful in the transition, especially coming directly out into a new job, because you don't have any understanding or really expectation of what's going to happen. It's a new world, and so we hire in pools as best we can. We onboarded 5 folks yesterday into the company from Army, Navy, and Air Force across the spectrum of job responsibilities in our company. But hiring together gives them that small group to bounce ideas back against. But you have to be careful there. There has to be balanced with making sure that the company brings those folks in as well. And so the best we can do to bring people along with mentors, or what we can do to pair people up so that they understand what the expectation should be like from a career progression standpoint, what the expectations should be like from what are my next roles and responsibilities, and how do we interact together. Those kind of things are just not known as you're coming out. I know that was my experience. I didn't really have a good understanding of what the real world was like, and it was helpful to have people who'd been through it before or were going through it with me to bounce those ideas off of.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. It's great feedback, especially coming from someone running a company and watching it take place in your own organization now, and especially now that you have high level of influence over how that works. So look forward to a great case study at your company in the future someday. That's awesome. So as a veteran also, we think these are good to know. The top 5 reasons from survey results that businesses hire veterans. So all of you have these, qualified, yes, in spades based on what the job is, of course, and what you did in the military. Able to handle challenging, stressful situations. I think that just about every military veteran has handled that in their career so far. And I got to mention just one funny example, very briefly from the past, in watching a company get their first experience of interviewing military ever. They never experienced it. They're in the semiconductor industry years ago, not Freescale, different one, but great company, big company. Their first time experience, they weren't sure if technicians out of the military would be able to work on their equipment, handle the stress of the situation, their plant, and so on. And the very first candidate they interviewed just happened to be the one that, well, they asked him, hey, tell us about a stressful or challenging situation you encounter. We're not sure that your experience makes you a great fit for this. We don't understand your background yet. Please explain something that was tough you had to encounter. He said, well, you remember, and this is years ago, you remember the cover of the Time magazine when they had a Tomahawk missile being launched during the Gulf War back in 1991? And the interviewer said, of course I do. We were all glued to the TV. He said, well, that missile actually misfired. And I'm the tech, the fire control tech that had to work on that. And you can imagine the stress of the admiral, the Navy captain, my senior NCOs, the press, everybody there yelling, screaming, get this fixed right now, because that had to hit its target on time to clear the corridor for the air assets that were already in the air flying to their destinations that night. And he handled it. No, total calm under stress. And the interview stopped the interviewer. This is 10 minutes in. He stopped it and said, I want to hire you. And he walked down the hall to meet with us and said, I want 10 more of them right now. Just like that. And so that's an example, just one little one of millions of stories of handling stress, stressful situations. They're used to it. They've been in it. And it's hard to encounter that at age 18, 19, 20 outside the military, no matter what they did in the service. Efficient, productive, technical skills, proven leadership skills. We've talked about some already. But thoughts on that, on the top 5 talents, traits that companies love to see in people, and how it relates to our veterans interviewing today, guys?
I think for me, it's veterans are just have experiences which you get early on that are what you hope every candidate you have, regardless of whether they're a veteran or not, has for your company. And so I don't know that there's a unique set of skills. There's perhaps an advanced set of skills for some folks who are coming out early. Great candidates are great candidates, whether they have a military background or a civilian background. But folks in the military have the advantage of getting those experiences early. And I think that's the point there that you're made with that technician in particular, right? Was you wouldn't expect anybody who's coming out at a, let's call it 25 to 35, perhaps to have the breadth of experience and the breadth of opportunity to have to perform in challenging situations. You hope that everybody you ever hire is flawless at that. As a military veteran, you have a unique experience of getting a lot of those opportunities early on.
Right, Glenn?
Yeah, so I'd point this out, and I know we're gonna dig into some of these topics a little bit more, but we have the list of these are the 5 amazing qualities of veterans. Then we have that statistic of 2/3 of veterans think they're being undervalued. So there's that gap that's there, and I think it comes down to, and again, I know we're going to be chatting about this. It's communication. How do you take that sort of information and relay it to somebody you're talking with, and you can share those stories, like you shared, and I have plenty of them as well from people I've mentored and hired, and I think they're amazing and they're fascinating. And the more we can share those, I think it actually helps, the next veterans or the other one that's struggling. But as much as we have all of those particular capabilities and those characteristics, we have to figure out, what does that mean now? What does that mean tomorrow? When we sit down with somebody, when we do an interview, how do we take those intangibles and turn them into something that makes sense? And to me, really where a lot of that gap happens is as you're transitioning out and you're being mentored, or, TAPS is taking you through the different things, the emphasis on where you find jobs, how you describe yourself and your capabilities is not necessarily what it's like when you're going and talking with, Orion or another company. And it comes down to, can you have a normal human conversation with somebody? And I don't say normal human because you're former military. It's just a different environment. And to me, I would say, again, I'll keep repeating it. As the civilian on the other side, I'm like, gosh darn it, it's not that hard. It's not. It's take a step back, chill for a second, and realize you do have these characteristics. So if you can describe those in a way that's like, hey, I'm a dude that has done some incredible stuff. I'm able to work with different people. I'm able to solve different problems. You get to a point where, unless you're, going to be a doctor or a lawyer or things that require very specific degrees or certifications, you can actually do anything if you want to. And so again, I know that's one of these tracks that we're going to follow, here over the next bit. But I really want to emphasize that as a point where, again, there is an incredible amount of talent that's out there. It's just a matter of figuring out how to describe that in a way that somebody else can latch onto.
And I'd say when you describe that, I think veterans sometimes have a propensity to water down too much the military experience and try to translate, I was a company commander of a 120-man company, to say I ran a 120-person organization responsible for whatever. And I think it waters down the real experience that you had. And what matters is your ability, as you said, to take that language that may be foreign to people and to talk about it in terms of how that translates and what that means for 120 different people with 120 different backgrounds and focused on one mission to accomplish, and using civilian language sometimes, perhaps, to describe those things, but never losing the fact that that's what you were. You were a company commander, right? You were an infantry officer. You were a submarine worker, right? Whatever it happened to be. I think it's you do yourself a disservice if you're not talking about what the real role was and just translating that into what that means. That's the advice I would give.
That's fantastic advice, Tony and Glenn. Thanks a lot for sharing that. It's so true, because there are a lot of lessons learned. And how do I, knowing that these are things companies like and look for, how do I translate that the best way possible? Because it does take a lot of homework. It takes a lot of self-analysis and work to get there for a lot of people. And sometimes I think for all of us getting out, I had to practice it a lot. And we're going to talk about how to prepare for this for you if you're making the transition. And companies, how I can help people out. But knowing those 5 top things that companies like to look for in hiring military talent, there are also some recruitment challenges that companies face. And I present this one just so that you can understand that some companies who aren't used to it as much yet don't always understand how your skill sets, leave the military, translate to the job or their company completely. They might not know how to explore your background well enough. So one of the very key things we'll talk about here in just a second is how do you translate that? And knowing this, that it could be a challenge if they're not familiar with your background, how do you ask them if they understand what you've told them so far? Because is it okay to do that in an interview, at the end of the interview, or along through the interview, if you want to comment?
Sure. So to ask your interviewer those clarifying questions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that what you don't want to see as an interviewer is a rote response to questions. You want somebody who can engage. To Glenn's point, can demonstrate that you're able to have a conversation and you're able to lead conversations and you're able to be thoughtful. And so I think those kinds of clarifying questions or making sure that they're understanding the message you're delivering is exactly what you should expect.
Yeah, I'd add to that, and I mean, this is just generally for anybody going into an interview. It goes both ways, and I think I'd probably say at scale with all the veterans that I've worked with that are looking for jobs, the majority, at least at the onset, don't look at it that way. They don't think that they're interviewing the company, that they're the asset. And oftentimes it's because there's certain things that are going on in their life where it's, oh, shoot, I need a job now, or I need to take a step back, or I get and I appreciate and understand that. But if you don't take the stance of asking those type of questions and learning when to say no, because there's certain jobs that, yes, there might be reasons to say yes, but if you don't get along, there's not values alignment, they don't understand a piece of what you think makes you valuable, you need to learn that. You need to understand. Otherwise, then you start getting into the statistics around, underemployment and, job unhappiness, which is also, two things that are incredibly high. So I would say, to your point and to, the question is absolutely, you need to do, respectfully, even push back in some cases, because I want to hear that, especially with a lot of jobs and anything that's facing that's customer-facing or internal teams, just to know that you have the ability to adjust around that. Having something be told to you that you don't necessarily agree with, well, instead of just immediately dismissing it, you're following up with a question to make sure you clarify. Sometimes it may just clarify that, all right, we're not on the same page. Others, it's, I just didn't quite understand what you're asking. Everything gets reframed and you move on. Right.
Great points. So let's talk about how to help people prepare then, for their interviews. whether, again, you're just getting out of the military or whether you've been out for a while and doing a transition out there. And there definitely are some basic strategy points to follow, pay attention to, and do your homework on, because, again, this does require a lot of self-analysis, a lot of homework. And that applies to anyone interviewing for anything in the world, military or not. And we still, given all the years that we've helped coach people in interviews, give them all the advice, how to write the resumes, how to do the self-analysis, how to put it all together, I've still seen some people that I screen or interview show up, haven't done it yet, that can't talk off their own resume. And I'll stop people sometimes preparing them and say, look at your own resume and pick the best example on there you'd like to talk about, and they have a hard time with it. Like, did you write your resume? So there's basic, simple steps. And getting ready to interview is not an overnight thing. It's like working out, right? I'm not going to change how I look or feel in one day by trying. I'm going to have to do it over time. So we always advise people, spend as much time as you can to get ready for this process of your life. And it's almost a full-time job on top of your full-time job, or what if you don't have one right now. At this point, treat it as a full-time job. The whole analysis, interview prep, and then networking. I know, Glenn, you'll talk about that some. But basic steps for people. Research yourself, number one, right? This is where, what have I done? How do I translate it? That's that phase of getting ready to go meet the other world out there, the civilian world, the non-military world, or the next job. And brainstorming your list. Your best examples come from your analysis and the exercises that you should do. And there are so many great books on this topic out there. I mean, one of the all-time greats still exists out there, always updated every couple years, is Martin Yate. Martin Yate wrote a book called Knock 'em Dead. Anybody hear about that one before in the past? There's lots of them, though. There's lots of free resources out there. All the military veteran websites and nonprofits support companies and candidates out there in this process. We have a guide our company wrote over years and always tweaks it because of our feedback from thousands of interviews, putting it together to help people understand, here's the simple steps to go through to analyze yourself, all the things you've done, piece it together, and then relate it into getting ready to interview. And so that's really the next step, is the prep part. Very key to follow the guides and the books on how do I answer interview questions. Some people try to wing it. Have you ever seen some try to walk in and wing it thinking, hey, I know my resume, I wrote it, I'm good to go? Any advice you want to give people who you've seen do that before or think about that?
I would say I've stopped them in the middle of it, and some I know have ended up in the jobs they're aiming for, and others haven't. It's because, again, that's one of those situations where I also, on the being the interviewer, I guess, I don't want to judge that because, again, they walked into a situation based upon what their expectations were. It changed. How do you adapt to it? And you can see some people dance real quickly and keep moving on and get things back on track, and others just, deer in the headlights and respectfully the whole thing's over. But to your point in the preparation is it doesn't need to be this massive deep dive on, what are the three people on the panel or the one person, and getting to know all of their history or finding those, what are the connection points so I can make a personal connection. You go too far down that road, it's going to feel unnatural. It feels really, really forced. But if you just start to realize that everything is about people, connections, communication, that's where it should come from. How can I convince this person that I'm the right person for this job, and what do I need to know in order to be able to convince them? That's the baseline starting, and everything above that it's just extra. But it's that simplistic approach. How do I find what I need to know so that I can sell myself into that particular job? And it's your job to sell yourself. Every person's a salesperson. Right.
A great point. It's how do I stay myself while preparing. All right. So it's like this. There's lanes to stay in. There's guide rails, on the sides of the highway here. I just need to stay between them, but still travel the path as who I am. All right. It shouldn't be unnatural, like you said, Glenn, at all. But just understand there's some basic rules, like should I talk for 5 minutes on every single interview answer? Yeah, no is the answer to that one. So follow the rules and prepare, but the better prepared you are, the more you can actually go back to being yourself, because now you got the basics down, you know what the company's looking for, and you know how to relate it. Any thoughts, Tony, there?
Well, I would say there are two types of interviews. There are technical interviews where people will ask you detailed questions about the job and trying to understand your capability to do the job, and those are important. There are also fit interviews where people are trying to understand how do you fit within the company culture? Do we share the same values? Do you share the company's values? And those are also very important interviews. I don't do technical interviews. I've got lots of folks on our team who are capable of doing technical interviews. When I talk to candidates, I care about values and I care about behaviors, and I want to understand if we value something in the company, does that candidate share the same values? And those are questions to prepare for as well. And I'd say they're harder questions to prepare for, because the technical questions are pretty straightforward. You understand it or you don't, and it's a lot of times okay to not understand it, because there's a training expectation that comes with jobs. But if you don't understand what you value or aren't able to articulate what you value, those fit interviews become more difficult. And so my advice would be to spend a lot of time in the interview process, not necessarily figuring out how to design a solar power plant, but more time figuring out what do I really care about, what do I care about in a company, because I'm interviewing them just like they're interviewing me, and do we share values together? And so I have to know mine first and be able to talk about them before I can have that conversation.
Absolutely, great points, great insight. So on the prep side then, for people as they get ready to depart the military, just make this next step, transition in life, focusing on your transferable skills. Know what you've done, be able to practice this stuff out loud. We highly recommend, as silly as it might sound, practice answers out loud, practice with somebody else, time yourself. Most people think they can do the intro to an interview or telling about yourself or some variation on that theme, which just about everybody asks first, right? In an interview, typically, at least that's what we've seen for all these years. Some people think they're ready for that and they ramble on for 5 or 10 minutes. That's not good. So practice these things. Again, stay in the guardrails, but know who you are, and then research the company to get ready for the next part of that. And just boiling it down real simply, what best advice I got all those years ago when I transitioned out, worked in manufacturing operations first, and before coming to Orion. And the best advice I got, and I still share it with people today, is once you do the prep, and then you're looking at that, each specific company you're going to interview with, analyze them before you go in. Again, you don't need to do an insane deep dig dive, but you need to know those basics on them for sure. And you should be able to glean out from their job description and from talking to someone in that company, if you know somebody there already, which is a great thing to find out, or networking around, or the recruiting person who's advised you on this, they should know it if they introduced you to this opportunity. Write down, on a little 3x5 card, keep in your pocket or something before the interview, before you walk in, the top 4 or 5 most important things that company's looking for, and then write down the 4 or 5 things, examples or traits of yours that relate to those. It's a great little refresher before you walk in. On the back of the card, write down your 3 questions you want to ask that company, that person in the interview. It's that simple. It's like the backwards planning coming from the military for interview prep. So recommend everybody does that to get ready before every single company they're going to see, and not to blow off that step. It's very important. And other things that are simple to do are know that when you talk about examples, accomplishments, the STAR format's a basic one we hear about a lot. It's a simple one to teach. Follow that acronym, STAR, situation, task, action, results, with your answers to keep yourself on target during your interview and to show them results. People want to hear, how did you quantify something? Measurements, proficiencies, what did you improve? Very simple things. All those books and all the free guides in the world out there will tell you to do. Just do the work and set yourself up for success, I would say, on that one. Thoughts on that, guys, before we wrap up this part?
The only thing I would say is there's nothing wrong with having that card during the interview as well. Life is an open book test, right? There's no job where you don't have the ability to go figure something out or look something up. And I, as an interviewer, don't have a problem with somebody referring to the card to make sure they got the questions answered, because it just shows that they were prepared. They didn't come in to wing it. They actually thought about the interview. And I don't think there's anything wrong with walking in with a book with questions on it or things to reference. I think that's not something to be afraid of.
Well, I'd actually add now on that, you bring a notebook in and make notes. Even when we're doing, I kind of, as we do different sorts of media interviews, or when I've run panels with people I've never met before, and sometimes these are like some of the coolest people I've ever been around, and I'm just thrilled to to be able to talk with them or to be able to share a stage. And I don't know where it's going to necessarily go. I can prepare and I can go, all right, this is their bio, this is theirs, and I can presume based upon these backgrounds, here's how they interact. But as we go through and talk about things, making notes of different topics, that's something that can easily apply into a professional interview, because again, you don't know exactly where it's going to go. You might mention something about your values. I want to keep listening, but I'll make a quick note while I'm listening so that I can follow up a little bit later and really drive home that point.
Awesome. Well, I guess the last step, the must-do is not to forget. Hopefully, if you're online or can see this or get a copy later on, don't forget this last one, everybody, because, again, you got to prep for telling about yourself. If you only had time to get ready for one question, I've always said to people, answer that first one pretty well. Know yourself well enough to be able to answer that in 2 or 3 minutes' time, and that it relates to what the company's looking for. Again, and you don't have time in an interview in 45 minutes or an hour, however long they are, to tell them everything you've done in your life to date. That's way too much. You need to pick out the top few things that are most relatable to that job and that company. You might have had the best, physical fitness test score in the entire military, but that might not be the right example to bring up for an operations leadership position or something like that. That makes sense. And then check the pulse, of your interviewer. Like we talked about earlier, do they understand what you went through? Are they getting it with you? At the end of the interview, at least at that point in time, you can say, hey, Glenn, thanks so much for interviewing time today. I'm really interested in your organization. Does what I told you today, does that make sense to this fit, this job or your company? Am I a good fit from what you see so far? And is there anything you want me to clarify better from my background for you? If somebody asked you, Tony, or you, Glenn, that interview, would you think it's okay for them to ask something like that?
Of course. And I also would expect that they want to know what I'm thinking about for the role, so that they can use that information to talk about how they fit to those expectations, right? What are you looking for in this role? Well, I want, this, and that. And so do I fit or not fit, and how do I mold my experiences to meet those expectations for the job?
Yeah, and I'm almost going to tack on to what you're saying there. It's about that fit. It still comes down to the person that's going into the interview understanding what do they want to get out of that job, and even determining maybe halfway through you realize it's not something for you. Don't bail at that point naturally, but you can still learn a lot about yourself. You can still practice your interviewing techniques. You can still you might develop a friendship with somebody, and maybe there's a different role down the road. But it's not downplaying just the value of being able to ask questions and follow up and make sure that what you're saying makes sense. Because I know I trip over my tongue constantly, and that's the best way to find out, am I making any sense? Did I go down the wrong path? And in the type of work I would want to do, I would want to have somebody say back to me, well, you know what, there was a couple things you're a little bit off. But I'm going to appreciate that, because even if I don't get that role, I learn and I can apply those things to the next interview.
No, that's great. And I don't know if you want to chime in on this one, but we always tell people to listen carefully to the question. As nervous as somebody might be, it's naturally being nervous when you interview. You might have been out there in corporate America or something, or in a job for 10 years, 20 years. It's still nervous. It's still acceptable to become a little nervous. Just use it as positive energy. Nervousness with a smile is called enthusiasm, right? So versus a frown. So we tell people, listen carefully to the question and answer that question they asked you. And then elaborate or expound as necessary, but answer. And sometimes there's things like, hey, give me 2 of this, or what are your top 3 strengths, or something like that. Numbers, whatever, then give them that, then answer it. A yes or no type of question should be answered with a yes or a no, then you can explain as necessary. Just basic, simple things like that. And again, the more you are yourself naturally, which comes from, I think, again, being better prepared in general for this phase, this interviewing transition, the easier it is to walk in, be yourself, be that person, and they're going to like who you are when you're yourself. In general, you'll be more relatable. Like Glenn's been saying, it's easier for you, easier for them. They'll enjoy the process, and they might come across out of the interview saying, this person, we've talked a lot back and forth. We've explored this job and this fit. They might not be like the best fit for this one job, but man, I love their fire. I love the energy. I love their enthusiasm. I love the fact that they're such a great problem solver, project manager, great with people. I think this other job could be a great fit, So you set yourself up for success when you just do the basics here on that slide.
No, two things there. If you're nervous, just say it when you walk in. It's okay. Reason being is when we're doing an interview, we can feel it. And just by saying that, it'll end up calming the room. I mean, it's the elephant in the room, and then you can move on from it. But also from a hiring perspective, you hire people first. That's what you're saying there. It's people first, and it's understanding there's going to be multiple roles. And the more you understand yourself and what you bring to the table, the role will be created for you. I mean, fact is, depending on the study, it's 40 to 70% of jobs aren't publicly listed anywhere. Well, what that means is 40 to 70% of jobs, nobody actually knows what the role is. They just sort of kind of know it's in this particular area and it has these responsibilities. Those are the most exciting ones to go find, because it comes down to your ability to, solve a problem that somebody might not even realize they have, and that's just communication.
Well, and there are hires that are made without a technical job responsibility fit. There are hires that are made because the company said, that's somebody I want in the company. Not sure exactly where they're going to go yet, but I know that I want them in the company. And that'll come from the conversation around role fit. But if the company, if you love the candidate, and you'll find a role for them because you think they're great for your company. They're going to help you advance. It's not something I share. I've had that conversation with multiple other CEOs or multiple other executives across the country when we talk about hiring practices is, if I find somebody great, we're just going to hire them, and we'll find the right role for them, because people are what make companies great. And if you have the right people, you'll find the right fit.
Great comments. Thanks a lot for sharing that. Let's jump ahead then into some things. Knowing that these are the basic rules people should think about, follow, how to prepare. And again, we're not trying to say that interviewing is easy because everybody wants a great hire out there. But just understand, when you make this transition as a veteran, you are highly marketable. It is just finding the right fit. But you also have to do what? Go through the effort to prepare and know that this is going to can take some time, this transition process. Give it the due effort it deserves, but know that you are marketable and you will find the right thing out there as long as you do the work to get there. You'll find the right fit eventually. So I'm going to jump ahead here, and while there's a lot of resources for companies to use out there to do better themselves, to make this process better for your own organization overall and have better results and better retention, we want to jump into, Tony, your part some here, and then talk more about, and then do a little bit of mock interview here with one of our people here today.
Yeah, what I recommend is, instead of spending a lot of time talking about FTC, is kind of skip forward to talk about values and what we care about. So we can talk about the company and our growth rate, but it really is only there to talk about why we think we're growing the way that we're growing and what we value. And so if you move forward here, we've gone from about 28 people to about 115 people across the last 3 years. We think we're going to grow our revenue more than 2x next year. That's all a really exciting story, but I'm not sure important for the conversation we're having today. So if we move forward to the conversation around our company values and what we're looking for in candidates, I think that's more important. And that's really, I think about things in threes. And so, when I think about what we look for in candidates, we want humble, energetic people. That's the most important thing that we look for. That's people who really are they're focused on the team, not focused on themselves. And they're excited about winning. And they're willing to learn and do what they need to do that. The second one is they're hardworking and team focused, right? That's something that veterans should have in spades, right? Is the ability to really be a part of a team and to work hard for that team, not for themselves. That's a critical task for what's important for us as an organization. And then the third one we've got there is being inquisitive, right? And being willing to be a problem solver, and that's important. There's companies move forward because people solve problems, right? Everything in an organization is a problem to solve, whether it's getting a little better, how do we do that, or there's a crisis that you've got to work through. There are people who lead us through problem-solving processes, and that's what make us better, and that's what we look for. I think all of those things are characteristics that that veterans have. And so then I think I've got a couple of tips on the next slide to talk to. And I try to relate this back to 30 years ago when I'm going through Ranger School. What do you learn about being successful in Ranger School, and what does that mean for being successful in the business world? And for me, the first one is carry the radio, right? So it sucks being in Ranger School. It's hard, and you're tired, and you're hungry and sleepy. But if you're willing to go do something else, like carry the radio for the guy who's in charge of running that patrol, you stay engaged, and you learn. And so I was best for when, the instructor changeover happened, is if I was engaged when I wasn't in a leadership role. And the way I stayed engaged was by carrying the radio. So find those opportunities to be engaged in the organization. That's the first most important one. The second one I had was carry the water, right? So there are streams, and somebody's got to go carry a bunch of canteens, and somebody's got to go down and get water for everybody. And that's not something that everybody wants to do. I'd rather go, take an hour and get some sleep if I have that opportunity.
Especially on top of your current job or being exhausted, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But if you're willing to go do something extra for the team, then you're going to stand out. That's just another way that you show I'm a part of this team, and I'm going to do more for the team to be successful. And the last part, which is very standard, is to be mission focused. Right? There are tons of opportunities for things to go wrong. The only thing that matters is that the results are delivered. And so you've got to look for solutions, not look for blame. There's no time in the military when something's happening and you're in a crisis to go figure out who was at fault. The only thing you're focused on is finding the solution and getting the results. And that's the same in business. There's no time to talk about whose fault it is for the situation that you're in. You can figure that out after you figure it out. And then go solve the problem, be mission focused, and then go figure out how to not let that happen again through problem solving. So that would be my kind of transitional advice.
That's great. Awesome to hear, for people to hear from, I think, from you. So, I guess wrapping this up a little bit before we bring Glenn up, other advice, anything else that you would share with candidates or people that are leaving the military, or again, veterans making another job transition in their lives, from just lessons learned overall? What things should they hear from us to wrap it up today?
One thing none of us have mentioned up here is the passion. This is one of the things that kind of gets me. And thankfully, the concern about finding something you're passionate about is, I think we're doing a good job of kind of squashing that. I hate to say it that way, but the reality is sometimes we need to be passionate about putting food on the table, or passionate about taking care of our family, not necessarily right now passionate about the exact thing that we're doing in the job. Sometimes we have to earn the ability over time to do so. I certainly have been humbled over my life to realize the same thing. But that's probably the biggest one. It's mostly younger, former enlisted, and it's just a byproduct of just natural culture. It's not something you that's instilled with you by the military or not, but it's how do you go find that thing? And sometimes it's a matter of you gotta earn your way in.
Tony, other thoughts here?
No, I think that's a great ad.
That's super. Well, Glenn, Tony, thanks a lot for sharing all that here today. Just great insight, great experience from your various backgrounds, and other than that, again, folks, preparing, can't emphasize it enough. Being yourself. I think one of the things I gleaned out of what we talked about today, right? And knowing that what you've done does relate a lot. Don't underestimate what you've done. Don't treat maybe your job of being a squad leader or team leader at age 20 with 4 or 8 people as not much. You've trained people. You've become an expert trainer. You've improved processes. You've been in charge of lives. All of those stuff at a very, like quote unquote, to everybody else in America, junior level in your life, young age in your life, and beyond from there. So those are tremendous experiences that you should be able and want to bring up and to be able to talk about in your interviews. Definitely. Just remember that. And don't think that if you're a technical person that system you worked on wasn't much and doesn't compare to what they're working on. It does. And just be able to explain it and walk through it. Other than that, I think we could bring up Glenn, right? I'm sorry, not Glenn. Drew. Bring up Drew. We'd like to go ahead and bring up Drew and have him sit on the couch here, and then Drew will ask you a question or two and just kind of get your perspective as you make a job transition. And Drew, you want to just introduce yourself real quick, what you do in the military, and what have you been doing since then?
So I'm Drew Law. I did aviation logistics, and I did security detail.
Okay, so you were aviation in which branch of the military?
Navy.
Navy, okay. How many years in the Navy?
8.
8 years. Well, thank you for your service. That's great.
Thanks, sir.
Did you start off in aviation in the Navy?
Yes.
Awesome. And can you explain what type of schooling you went through in the Navy to learn what you did in the aviation world? Did you have any type of certain school you did to get ready for the aviation part of the Navy?
Yes, definitely. Our A school is what we call it in the Navy. It's in Meridian, Mississippi. It's pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. So,
as are many military locations to training. All right. So more recently, you were sharing with us before today or before this session that you ended up running a team for a hotel property here in Austin. Is that right? Running a security organization, building it from the ground up, and so on. Is that right?
yes, sir.
Okay. Something that the Navy really trained you well to do on day one at age 18. Is that right? Or it did not?
Definitely not. No.
All right. So to me, Drew, it seemed like a typical experience where another example of someone leaving the military that is in a situation where you're going to go do something you didn't necessarily do completely in the military, didn't exactly go through a school to learn how to do it, to break that stereotype for everybody, but you figured it out, made it happen. And can you walk us through this? If we were, or if I guess was your interviewer here, and if you're interviewing for a position to go do that again, to lead, actually, just make it easy, to lead a team, to manage an operations piece of an organization somewhere, whether it's 8 or 10 people or a lot more, whatever the case might be, or 5. Let's say you're interviewing for something like that, and I'll just ask you a simple question. Drew, can you tell me about a time when you had to lead or build up a team from the ground up, and how'd that go for you?
All right. Well, when it came to the hotel, I'd never worked in hospitality before, so that was definitely an experience for me. They definitely saw something in me, so they gave me that opportunity. They allowed me to build the team from the ground up, and allowed me to choose all my team members, which meant a lot. And then, the team became extremely successful, and that is mainly due to the team members working together as a team, and we all, bouncing ideas back and forth to each other and learning off of each other. So it definitely wasn't just because of me; it was because of the team. So.
Okay, what would you say like the results were in the end then? How did it go for you and the team?
I'd say it went very well. All of the other locations in the hotel, all over the U.S., all over Texas, they want to mock their teams based off of ours.
Okay, super. And so in answering a question like that, being able to kind of go into the star format a little bit, it was helpful, right? That's why I asked about results at the end, but it's great. And Tony and Glenn, if I could ask, either one of you, if you heard that as an interviewer, what would you think? And then, what might you ask next? How would you feel about what Drew did with no experience whatsoever, no training in this, come out and build and run a successful organization? Thoughts on that?
Well, I heard 2 things that I think I'd really want to pursue in the next part of the question. The first was you talked about the team and not you, right? And so for me, that's a big deal. And so I'd want to understand, because you are the leader, how you fostered that culture in the organization. And then I want to understand what about the results, or what about the way that you went about the business led to the rest of the hotel chains wanting to mimic that. And those are 2 really interesting things that I would love to hear you expand upon.
Yeah, I'd add the same thing, that latter part, when you say what our team, or what you implemented with your team was wanting to be replicated throughout the state. That immediately, that opens up a whole number of different questions, because it shows me that not only were you a fit for what they wanted you for, you actually added to it because you became a leader to help, with development of process.
Right, that's super. Great feedback. So, what I felt was, okay, humble guy, had no problem probably doing what you did. And I would be wanting to dive in, like they said, also, Drew, let me unwrap this, get you to unwrap this, because there's some things you did that made you successful at doing that. What were those? I need to figure out more about your personality, maybe ask some questions about other tough situations you've encountered. Because I would feel like there's a lot of material, there's a lot of stuff here to run with, because this is not normal. I mean, is it normal for someone with no experience to walk in an organization and build something for the first time ever and have it be really successful? Tony or Glenn, have you seen that a lot?
No.
Right. So, but I think we do see examples similar to yours, Drew, with a lot of military folks. They just need to be able to, talk through and explain it to people when they ask about it. And it is a common thing, though. I mean, doing more with less, doing things in environments that you're just not used to, never been in before, and making it happen, and being willing to give it a shot, being willing to go for it. So, and because you learned basics on working with people in the military for sure. You probably were around some good leaders you learned from, and maybe not as great leaders you learned lessons to from, right? And then how do I apply those when I take over a team myself? I'm sure, did you apply anything like that in your experience?
I definitely did. I will say when it came to the hotel, so my first job out of the military, I was a chauffeur. So with that job, you naturally learn good customer service, catering to the customer. And you do the same thing in the hospitality industry. Well, I also have an extensive background in event security, personal protection. So de-escalation verbally without having to touch somebody, right? So all of that combined, I feel like is what allowed me to do my job well.
That's super. All right. Let's ask another question here. Tony or Glenn, would you have one you'd like to ask if this were an interview? Any thoughts on that?
With how we're running on time, I'd say probably not. My main thing, though, I'd throw out there, if this was going on for another half hour, is more almost taking a step back from the mentorship perspective. And with your background, with where you are now, the question would be, why have you not, or have you even considered going out and starting your own consulting company or your own personal protection? Yes, understanding there's tons of those all over the place, but your take on it is certainly unique, and you have that experience to be able to lean on.
I'm actually doing that right now.
That's good.
That was what I was hoping you were saying.
Well, it's great with what you've done, and what I see is a smooth, calm ability to go do that and to lead teams and to bring things together well and make them work. I would think if anybody in the Austin area is watching this that has an opening that could be along the lines of what you're interested in, they should be getting in touch with you.
Well, speaking of that, where can they find you online?
So Drew Law on Facebook, Instagram. I am on LinkedIn as well, and Twitter.
Fantastic. Well, Drew, we certainly appreciate you jumping up here on the hot seat, in front of the audience, the virtual audience out there. It's not easy to do, and you didn't look nervous to me.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Well, good luck with the job search and everything. Appreciate it. And other last parting thoughts, Glenn or Tony?
He mentioned LinkedIn. We don't have a session for it, but if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. If you don't know how to be on there, go find somebody. There's actually a free military account with a ton of extra features on it, which is pretty easy to find if you just search probably military LinkedIn. But that is another one of those massive areas that's a huge plus for you.
And I would just say it's a great vehicle to connect with people, even if you're not looking for a job in their company, but to get feedback or to network with, to understand how you can be successful. I've had folks connect with me, and they've been great relationships.
Super. Thank you very much, then, for your feedback and time today, everybody. Appreciate it very much. And thanks again to Veterans Lounge and Dallas and the team here put this all on. And any questions that the audience has, by all means, feel free to get in touch with any of us here. Thanks so much.